What a Chinese-hosted World Cup would actually look like. China has 59 stadiums that meet FIFA's requirements for hosting a World Cup match. You heard that right, 59. That is more than enough to run an entire 48-team tournament tomorrow without building a single new venue. To put that in perspective, Saudi Arabia, the confirmed host of the 2034 World Cup, needs to construct 11 of its 15 proposed venues from scratch. And that is just the beginning. If this is the kind of story you didn't know you needed, hit a quick like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the gap between what China builds and what China plays is the most revealing thing about how this country uses sport as a weapon of geopolitical ambition. Here is the central paradox. China is the only country on Earth capable of delivering the most technologically advanced, most logistically overwhelming World Cup in the history of the tournament, and simultaneously the only major footballing nation whose men's team could credibly finish last in it. The men's national team sits ranked 94th in the world. Their one and only World Cup appearance came in 2002. They lost all 3 group stage games. They did not score a single goal. That record has not changed since. Xi Jinping has publicly committed to 3 goals for Chinese football: qualify for a World Cup, host a World Cup, and win one. As of 2026, China has achieved none of the 3. And yet the country has built more football infrastructure than any nation in history in pursuit of them. So what would it actually look like? Let's find out. The stadiums that shouldn't exist yet. Picture a warehouse. Not a small one, the kind that takes a full minute to walk from one end to the other. Now imagine 59 of those warehouses, each one redesigned to hold between 40,000 and 91,000 screaming people scattered across one of the largest countries on the planet. That is the baseline. That is what China already has. The Beijing National Stadium, the Bird's Nest, seats 91,000 people. That is the same capacity as the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the largest stadium in the southern processed hemisphere. It was built for the 2008 Summer Olympics, and it still stands as one of the most recognizable sports venues ever constructed. Then there is the Hangzhou Sports Park at 80,000 seats, designed to resemble a giant lotus flower when seen from above. The Shanghai Stadium at 72,000. The rebuilt Workers' Stadium in Beijing, 68,000 seats, reopened in 2023 after a complete reconstruction. The Chongqing Longxing Football Stadium at 60,000, purpose-built for football, opened in 2022. Now here's the part that most people never think about. One of these stadiums was not built for the Olympics. It was not built for a World Cup. It was built for an Asian Cup that China ultimately never even hosted. The Xi'an International Football Center, designed by Zaha Hadid Architects, 60,000 seats. A saddle-shaped structure with a cable net roof engineered to minimize weight over a span that would have defeated conventional construction, was developed specifically for the 2023 Asian Cup. China withdrew as host in 22, citing pandemic conditions. The stadium exists anyway. That is the structural reality of what China's football infrastructure program has produced. Venues built not because there is a tournament to fill them, but because the ambition precedes the occasion. No other country on Earth has built at that sequence: infrastructure first, justification second. Now think about what a host nation actually needs. You need transportation to move hundreds of thousands of fans between cities. You need the technology to manage crowds at a scale no previous host has managed. You need the manufacturing capacity to produce the physical fabric of the event itself. China has all 3. And the first one is where the gap between China and every other potential host becomes structurally incomparable, not by a margin, but by an order of magnitude. As remarkable as the stadiums are, they are still just the containers. What happens between them is where the real story begins. The rail network that rewrites what hosting means. Think of a garden hose. Now think of what happens when you connect enough garden hoses end to end that they circle the earth once and still have enough left over to stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back again. That is the approximate length of China's high-speed rail network, over 31,000 miles of operational track. You heard that right, 31,000 miles. The entire European Union's high-speed network combined covers roughly 9,000 miles. China's network is more than 3 times larger, and it connects 31 of the country's 34 provincial-level administrative divisions. On peak operating days, China runs up to 10,000 high-speed train services. That is 10,000 individual train departures in a single day, moving 16 million trips across the country before midnight. To picture 16 million trips, that is roughly the entire population of the Netherlands, boarding and completing a high-speed rail journey in 24 hours. Now picture a World Cup fan traveling between Beijing and Shanghai, 2 of the most likely host cities in any Chinese bid. The distance between them is approximately 800 miles. That is roughly the same as driving from Miami to New York. On China's high-speed network, you cover that distance in under 5 hours at 217 miles per hour. Not by plane, not by car, by train. On infrastructure that was already carrying 4.3 billion passenger trips per year before a single World Cup visitor arrived. Here is what makes this genuinely unlike anything a World Cup host has ever offered. In Brazil in 2014, fans traveling between cities frequently had no viable option but to fly. The country's internal aviation infrastructure became so strained that domestic flight delays became part of the tournament story. In Qatar in 2022, the host nation's entire territory was small enough that every stadium was accessible from a single city. China's answer is neither of those things. China's answer is, the trains are already there, they run every few minutes, and they go everywhere. Here is the brutal catch though. A network this large, moving this many people, requires a crowd management system of a scale and sophistication that no previous World Cup host has come close to deploying. And China has one. The question is whether the world will be comfortable with what it looks like up close. The transport network tells you what China can move. What comes next tells you what China can see, and that is an entirely different conversation. The cameras that never blink. Imagine every ATM, every traffic light, every bus stop, every hotel lobby in a city the size of Greater London, each one fitted with a camera. Now multiply that city by the 30 or 40 largest metropolitan areas in the United States combined. That is roughly the scale of China's surveillance infrastructure. Estimates put the country's camera network at up to 600 million units. 600 million cameras, roughly 3 cameras for every 7 people living in China. That number is so large it stops feeling real, so anchor it differently. If you laid those cameras end-to-end at their standard housing size, the row would stretch from the Earth to the Moon and back, twice. The 2008 Beijing Olympics was the first time facial recognition technology was deployed at the scale of an Olympic venue. The system ran at the bird's nest for the duration of the Games. At the time, it was considered a remarkable technical achievement. Now, here is what most people get wrong about that moment. 2008 was not the peak of what China was building. It was the prototype. The system that operated at the bird's nest during the Beijing Olympics is to China's current surveillance infrastructure what a cassette tape is to a data center. By 2026, China has deployed AI-integrated surveillance with facial recognition and real-time location tracking across major urban systems. Emotion detection technology cameras trained not just to identify faces, but to analyze micro-expressions and predict crowd behavior has been deployed in public spaces. The same systems used for domestic governance would, at a Chinese World Cup, operate at every venue, every fan zone, every transit hub, and every hotel corridor simultaneously. And under FIFA's hosting agreements, FIFA would have reviewed and approved the infrastructure plan before a single ball was kicked. That is the tension that no other World Cup has had to confront at this scale. The security infrastructure that makes a Chinese World Cup operationally possible is inseparable from the domestic governance system that human rights organizations have spent years documenting. You cannot take the rail network without the surveillance network. They run on the same architecture. Western football associations, sponsors, and media organizations would face a question with no clean answer. How do you participate in the most logistically impressive World Cup ever staged while the cameras in the concourse are the same cameras used to monitor political dissidents 2 weeks earlier? That question stays unanswered. What doesn't stay unanswered is how China would supply the rest of the tournament. Because the manufacturing dimension of a Chinese World Cup is where the story stops being uncomfortable and starts being almost absurd in its Completeness. The country that built the last World Cup, it didn't attend. Here is a detail that engineers don't want to admit, or rather, that nobody in football administration seems to want to say out loud. At the 2022 Qatar World Cup, China did not qualify. China also built it. Start with the screens. Every large LED display panel across all 8 Qatar World Cup stadiums, every peripheral commercial display, every TV broadcast screen in the venues was supplied by Chinese manufacturers. Shenzhen-based Unilumin alone provided 3,600 square meters of LED screens at Lusail Stadium, the venue that hosted the final. 3,600 square meters is roughly the floor area of a large residential building, covered entirely in display panels made in one Chinese city and installed in another country's flagship venue. Then the seats. Shenzhen manufacturer Avant Sports supplied tens of thousands of movable and retractable seats across all 8 venues. These were not standard stadium seats. They were engineered with a new cooling material capable of reducing surface temperature by 9 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit in Gulf heat. A fan sitting in those seats, cooling off in 40 degrees Celsius weather, was sitting in a product invented and manufactured in Shenzhen. Then the balls. An authorized FIFA soccer ball manufacturer based in Yiwu shipped 300,000 tournament balls to Qatar and global markets for the 22 tournament. 300,000 balls stacked. That column would stand taller than 4 Eiffel Towers placed end to end. Now, here is the part that blows people's minds. The physical hardware inside the stadiums is still only part of what China contributed. Manufacturing in Yiwu, a city of roughly 2 million people in Zhejiang province, accounted for approximately 70% of all merchandise used at Qatar 2022, not just Chinese merchandise. All of it. Flags for all 32 competing nations, trumpets, whistles, footballs, jerseys, scarves, decorations. If you bought a replica jersey for a team that had nothing to do with China, there is a 70% chance it was made in Yiwu. And then there is the sponsorship. 20 Chinese companies committed nearly $1.4 billion in World Cup sponsorship for Qatar 2022 at a tournament China did not qualify for. U.S. companies, representing the country that did qualify and was hosting the next edition, committed $1.1 billion. China outspent the United States in sponsorship at a tournament where China was not on the pitch. For a China-hosted World Cup, the manufacturing dimension transforms entirely. The seats, the screens, the balls, the jerseys, the broadcast infrastructure, the stadium lighting, the fan merchandise, the air conditioning systems, the high-speed trains moving fans between cities, all made in China, installed by China, and run by China, not as a supply chain contribution to someone else's event, as the host nation demonstrating that it manufactures the physical fabric of modern sport itself. But manufacturing is not the final dimension. There is a layer above the hardware, the geopolitical staging, the soft power operation, and that is where Xi Jinping's ambition reveals its full shape. The trifecta. Think of a collector completing a set, not stamps or coins, the 3 largest sporting events in human history. China hosted the Summer Olympics in 2008, 4 billion viewers, the bird's nest, the opening ceremony that the world has not stopped talking about since. Then in 2022, China hosted the Winter Olympics, becoming only the 9th country in history to host both. 2 for 2. The World Cup is the 3rd piece, and it is the biggest one. The FIFA World Cup reaches an estimated 5 billion viewers over the course of a tournament. That number is larger than the combined viewership of the Summer Olympics and every other major international sporting event that exists. 5 billion people, roughly 63% of the human population. Now, here's the detail that puts everything into perspective. Xi Jinping has publicly stated 3 goals for Chinese football: to qualify for a World Cup, to host a World Cup, and to win one with the winning ambition tied to 2050, the centenary of the People's Republic. The hosting alone, regardless of what happens on the pitch, delivers a global televised showcase of Chinese infrastructure, Chinese cities, Chinese technological capacity, and Chinese crowds, to an audience that dwarfs any previous platform the country has ever accessed. The screens showing the goals would be Chinese, the trains carrying the fans would be Chinese, the balls on the pitch would be Chinese, the stadiums housing the matches would be Chinese. The surveillance cameras monitoring every fan zone would be Chinese. The only things that would not be Chinese would be the teams competing for the trophy and the team from China if the men's national side qualified, which as of 2026, they have never done again since 2002. Qatar demonstrated what soft power through sport looks like for an authoritarian adjacent government. Not a World Cup that changes what the world thinks of you overnight, but a World Cup that forces the world to engage with you on your own territory, in your own infrastructure, inside a broadcast window that reaches more people than any other platform on Earth. China has watched that playbook closely. A Chinese World Cup would be Qatar multiplied by a factor that is difficult to calculate, larger in scale, larger in reach, longer in duration, and deployed by a country with manufacturing infrastructure that Qatar never had. But here is where the story pivots from impressive to genuinely uncomfortable. Because for all of the infrastructure, all of the manufacturing dominance, all of the geopolitical staging, the football itself has gone in the wrong direction. 70,000 pitches, and a team ranked 94th. Here is what the Chinese government has invested in football development since Xi Jinping made football reform a national policy priority. 70,000 football pitches mandated for construction across the country, roughly the number of pitches it would take to cover the entire city of San Francisco in playing surfaces. 20,000 football training schools established, billions of dollars injected into the Chinese Super League, luring international stars and coaches. The league's spending on foreign players during the 2010s rivaled European leagues that had been building for a century. Here is where that investment landed. In 2016, the men's national team ranked 82nd in the world. By 2026, they ranked 94th. After a decade of record infrastructure spending, China's men's team has gone backwards by 12 places in the global rankings. Now, here is what most people get wrong about this. The investment was real. The pitches are real. The schools are real. The money moved from government accounts to construction firms, from transfer fees to foreign agents, from national federations to provincial academies. None of that was theater. But the result, 94th in the world after the most concentrated football investment program in the history of the sport, suggests that something fundamental about the model is broken at a level that capital allocation cannot fix. Football at the elite level is not a bridge. You cannot commission it, fund it, set a completion deadline, and inspect the structural integrity of the output. A bridge is built by applying sufficient engineering expertise to a defined problem with a defined solution. Football development is something different. It is the accumulated result of millions of individual children playing freely, failing, competing, adapting, developing physical intelligence that cannot be taught by decree and cannot be built by a government tender process. China has a word for this in its own development philosophy. You cannot rush the maturation of organic systems by increasing capital input. The government appears to have tried anyway. The stadiums hold 91,000 people. The trains run at 217 miles per hour. The cameras see 600 million lenses worth of the country at once. The team ranks 94th. These are not contradictions. They are the same sentence told from different ends. And what they add up to the question that the final dimension of this story forces you to sit with is one that no analyst has yet answered cleanly: what the infrastructure actually proves. Here is the question that every football analyst, every geopolitical strategist, and every FIFA executive quietly avoids when China comes up in the same conversation as a World Cup hosting bid. If China hosts, and China exits in the group stage, and 5 billion people watch it happen inside the most technologically advanced sporting infrastructure ever assembled, what exactly did the infrastructure prove? The honest answer is, it proved exactly what it was designed to prove. And it did so regardless of the scoreline. The World Cup is not, for China, primarily a football tournament. It is the largest uninterrupted industrial exhibition in broadcasting history, wearing the uniform of a football tournament. The screens are the product. The trains are the product. The cameras are the product. The stadiums are the product. The Chinese team's results are incidental to the display being made. Look at the 2008 Olympics. China finished first in the gold medal count. But the moment most people remember, the moment the world reevaluated what China had become, was not an athletic performance. It was the opening ceremony. It was the stadium. It was the infrastructure of the event itself, projected onto 5 billion television screens in one night. Usain Bolt won gold in Beijing and became the most famous sprinter in history. China won something else that night, a global reappraisal of its industrial and organizational capacity that no trade fair, no diplomatic summit, and no press release could have delivered. A World Cup delivers that reappraisal across 30 or more days, across 12 or more cities, across every broadcast feed on the planet. For 5 billion viewers, the host nation is not the backdrop. It is the stage itself. Here is what makes this story genuinely different from every previous geopolitical use of sport. China is not using the World Cup the way the Soviet Union used the Olympics to prove athletic supremacy. It is not using it the way Qatar used it to accelerate international legitimacy for a small nation. China is using it the way a manufacturing giant would use the world's largest showroom to put every seat, every screen, every train, and every stadium in front of the world's largest audience, and let the infrastructure make the argument that diplomats cannot. The men's team ranked 94th is not an embarrassment inside that framing. It is the honest acknowledgement that the game being played on the pitch is different from the game being played in the infrastructure surrounding it. China is competing in both, and it has already won the one that does not show up on the scoreboard. That is the story of what a Chinese-hosted World Cup would actually look like. Not the football, the everything else. The seats, the cameras, the trains, the screens, all of it made in China, run by China, and broadcast to 5 billion people who will remember the infrastructure long after they have forgotten who scored in the quarterfinals. If this changed how you think about what a World Cup is actually for, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. If China hosts and exits in the group stage, is that a humiliation or does it not matter at all?